Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kevin Case, and I'm the new Director of Development for the American Physical Society. Happy to be a part of this great organization and to support this wonderful mission. And I'm especially happy that you have all made the decision to join this webinar today on estate planning and charitable giving for physicists. We are joined today by two wonderful gentlemen who've agreed to do this webinar for us based on the experiences that they've had in this area. They are some very credible resources to help guide our decision making in this regard. And I'd like to introduce both of them to you right now. Brian Schwartz is professor of physics at Brooklyn College and the Graduate Center of the City University of New York. His research is in materials sciences. He recently won the American Institute of Physics Andrew Gamont Award for ingenious creativity in engaging the public with the history and cultural aspects of physics. He got his undergraduate degree from the City College of New York and his PhD is from Brown University. He was also on the faculty of MIT. And he's a fellow of the American Physical Society and of the American Association for the Advancement of Science. Welcome, Brian. I'd also like to welcome David Morrison. David is a partner with Prosperion Financial Advisors. He's also a board member of the Colorado Planned Giving Roundtable. David has helped many families with their charitable estate planning strategies, and he's worked with investors for more than 30 years at trust departments, at large banks, at investment companies like Merrill Lynch, Fidelity, and Bank One. He joined Prosperion Financial Advisors in 2004. And welcome to you, David. Before both Brian and David get started on their remarks, there are just a couple of things that I want to mention to all of you today. The expert opinions that are being provided to you are the opinions of these two gentlemen. They are not necessarily the opinions of APS, and we certainly encourage you when you're making decisions about estate planning and charitable giving that you always remember to reach out to a tax advisor. Today's session is being recorded, and the decks that have been compiled by these two gentlemen are going to be made available upon request. There will be a Q&A session at the end as well. I also want you to just say a quick hello to Miriam Metter, who is our campaign and donor relations manager at APS. She's the person that put together this great webinar, and she will be coordinating the Q&A session at the end. Brian, with that, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. I'm going to go through a bunch of slides, and I hope you'll enjoy them, and we'll see. The first slide really deals with the title. In other words, this is estate planning and charitable giving for physicists. I say for physicists because it's important that we specialize this to the unique abilities of physicists. The outline of the talk is as follows. I'm going to ask everyone to get a pencil and a piece of paper to take the quiz. It's a fun quiz, which will test your knowledge of finance, and it'll test a little bit of if you know how the physicists think and how they live their lives. Me being one of them, I think I'm fairly typical. So there'll be some questions and some answers, and we'll go over the questions and answers one by one. Then I will go into the stages of life of a typical APS physicist in a sense where you start off with a young physicist with a PhD, you then get married, you have children, you buy a house, your kids go to college, that whole thing, and to talk about as you have to do estate planning at these different phases of your life. And then I'll talk a little bit about how much joy you get from giving, and I can give examples of my own situation, that it's a pleasure to give money while you're still alive, because you can then see the benefits of that. And then I'll talk about why giving to the APS is particularly advantageous in the sense that the APS is one of the organizations that is responsible in many cases for our success. So if I could have the first question on the next slide, if I could have the next slide, please. Question 1. So get a piece of paper, pencil, write down your answer. The statement is, the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest. Now, who said it? Was it Adam Smith, Karl Marx, Albert Einstein, John Maynard Keynes, or none of the above? So write down your answer. We're going to answer this very shortly. Question number 2, if I can have the next slide. Now, this is a long one, so let me read it. In 1986, the APS held its April meeting in Las Vegas at the MGM Grand Hotel, in which at that time 4,000 physicists attended. Which of the following, so get your pencil out and get ready. The hotel, the MGM Hotel, had its worst week since it opened. It was opened a long time. 2B, the APS was politely asked never to return, not just by the MGM Grand, but by the entire city of Las Vegas. 2C, since many physicists knew the odds were stacked against them, they just didn't play. 2D, one casino server was overheard saying they each bought one shirt and a $10 bill and changed neither. And 2E, Las Vegas finally relented and decided to take a chance on an APS meeting. In fact, we have now scheduled a March meeting, this is true or false, after 37 years in the year 2023. So are all above the true or just some of them true? Write it down. Question number 3. Which of the following statements below are true or false? And this is important. 1, with the recent change in the tax laws, if you do not itemize your deductions, there's no way to include charitable deductions. Is this true or false? And it makes a big difference if it's false or true. B, if you make 9% annually on your money, the initial amount will double in approximately 8 years. True or false? 3C, with the recent proposed change in labor laws, brokers and certified financial planners are required under a fiduciary rule to act in the best interest of their clients when providing financial advice. So you have to know what a certified financial planner is and what is the fiduciary rule. And 3D, which is a little bit more humorous, the average car for physicists is over 10 years old. 3E, most physicists have never paid interest charges on a credit card. And 3F, older physicists, assuming good family health, have a more substantial net worth than they realize. So now we're going to go over the answers to these questions. Question 1, what famous person made the following statement? And the answer is Albert Einstein, who said the most powerful force in the universe is compound interest. Now the question is, did he really say it? One of the slides I have says on the left, he did say it, but then on the right, Einstein has been accused or claimed to have said many, many things. And so one of the statements that he also claimed to make, I never said half the crap people said I did. But I believe that none of the other economists said that the compound interest was that important. But Einstein understood the math. In answer 2, that the fact that all these things were true about the meeting in Las Vegas, the actual thing is they had the worst week they ever had. We were asked really never to return. Physicists knew the odds. Physicists are not good gamblers because they know that in the end, no matter what it is, the odds are stacked in favor of the house. Physicists are really thrifty, so they don't exactly gamble. And then finally, it's true. We finally convinced the MGM Hotel in Las Vegas to take a chance on us that we've changed and scheduled 2023 meeting is in Las Vegas. So we'll have to see whether we've acted better the next time. If I can have the next slide. This was in a headline in the paper, physicists in town, lowest casino take ever. And so it was really a bad week for the casinos. And they did ask us never to return. But as I said, they're taking a chance on us. It's something like 37 years later. They say once every 37 years, they're willing to take a chance. If I can have the next slide. Now, this is very important. And David, who's going to speak right after me, and who is a financial planner, will discuss this in some detail. But there was recently a change in the tax law in which you don't have to itemize deductions to get a fairly large deduction. And so for many people, If you made a charitable deduction, you couldn't take it because it fell within this minimum requirement or something. But it turns out that there is a law which talks about what's called a qualified charitable deduction when you give a money directly from your IRA to a charity, and you have to be over a certain age. But David's going to go into this detail. You can take the standard deduction, and you can also get a charitable deduction. So you can do a double header in a sense. Now, it turns out if you make a certain amount of money per year, you have a certain amount of time to double it. And it's the one I asked if it was 9% that the money doubles in 8 years. There's a rule of 72, which is just a simple approximation of determining if you know the amount of money you gain per year, then you can take an approximate calculation of when it doubles. So for example, if your return rate, if you look in the chart, was 9%, it takes 8 years. Divide 9 into 72. If it were 3%, it would take you 24 years to double. If it was attractive like 12%, it would only take 6 years to double. So this is, again, compound interest. If you take a look at 30-year periods and you ask yourself a question, if I put some money in and asked what happens if for 30 years I didn't touch it with the ups and downs of the market, it turns out for every 30-year period you can take, the investment was greater than 8% and sometimes as large as 14%. So this is the wiggle graph that you see in front of you, but it says that if you're patient enough and you invest smartly and you follow just the market or something like that, and in our case, many people invest in S&P 500, then after 30 years, the average gain typically is on the order of 10%. And you can see that this wiggle graph shows that. So for example, if you invested money in 1986, you would have gotten a return of about 9%. And what happens is people say, well, maybe within the 30 years there were disasters that occurred, like the fall of the stock market or war, or there was a disruption in the stability of the United States, or various things happened. And it turns out that throughout this, with the typical ups and downs of the stock market and the typical reactions to events that always will occur, yet it's fairly remarkable that the returns after 30 years in every single case has been attractive. So you learn that that if you make investments and you stick with those investments and you do them, if you can, when you're young, it's a very good strategy for investing. If I could have the next slide, the true and false, this was a certified financial planner. And again, David will speak a little bit more about this, but there is something called the fiduciary rule, which means that the person who invests money for you and gives you advice must take into account your situation and must be serving you and must not be serving the institution they work for, or buying you things or churning in your account. And the fiduciary rule is to make sure that the planners will do this for you. The rule got held up, and it's still complex and still working its way through the federal government. But I can say that many, many financial planners and many, many institutions are following a fiduciary rule independent of what the government is really requiring. So again, if you get advice from somebody, you must speak to them and ask, are they acting in a fiduciary way for your investments? Very important. Now, the average car for physicists, and this isn't an accurate survey, but in all my friends, and I've asked them, how old is their car? Typically, they're older than 10 years and many older than 15 years, and some winners are 20 years. I actually have an old car that is from 1965, which is now 45 years old. It's a convertible. It's not my only car. My regular car is a 2008, so it's only 12 years old. And in some ways, by not buying a car every few years, physicists actually accumulate more wealth than normal. Most physicists, again, on the question of credit card, has a physicist ever paid interest on a credit card? The answer is no. Almost every physicist I speak to understands that 1.5% per month, which sounds like a penny and a half per dollar, is actually over 18% per year. And so most physicists will pay off their credit card without paying any service charge. Most people like me also sometimes have missed because I was out of town or I forgot. So I immediately call them and tell them it was an error on my part. Could you please not charge me interest? So I have actually never paid interest on a credit card. Now, it turns out that physicists end up being a lot wealthier than they thought they were going to be, partly because they lead a modest life, and usually they understand income and they understand outgo. And so they make sure that their spending and their outflow, in terms of income, remain very, very stable. They never spend more than they have. And as a result of that, assets which are accumulating build up, and the net worth is something that's adds up over the years. So if I could have the next slide, I just make the stages of life very simple. We can divide it the following way. When you're sort of 25 to 35 and you enter the workforce, you're really getting a starting salary. You probably either just got married or about to get married, and you're just starting out, so your net worth isn't substantial because you're living on your salary. When you end up in the 35 to 45, you buy a house. Your kids are going to elementary school. They're born. You're developing. Your job is getting better and better, but your net worth still isn't much because your house has a big mortgage on it. Although you may have a pension, there isn't much in the pension. And again, you have considerable expenses with 2 children. When you get to be 45 to 55, you're getting into a higher earning bracket, but unfortunately, your kids decide to go to college, paying college. And although you're beginning to have a pension, which is substantial, it's still not substantial enough. But suddenly at age 55 to 65, things begin happening. The first thing that happens is you're making the highest salary you've made in your lifetime. 2, the amount of money in your pension is now substantial and in fact growing substantially. The amount that you put in the pension as compared to the growth is now getting smaller and the growth is substantial. The third thing is that your kids have finished college and there isn't this big expense with college. And again, your house is paid off, perhaps you've got a second house and it might be paid off. So your net worth is substantial, yet you've been living your life in which your income and your outgo are tracking one another, and the net worth is not being capitalized on or really appreciated. So I say that if you're a certain age and you're thinking about giving charity, it turns out that the substantial net worth really puts you in a very strong position to give to charity. So now I want to talk about what are the pleasures of giving. It turns out that if you're in a situation where you've established a good net worth, you can have a very comfortable retirement. Although physicists don't like retiring, you can have just a very comfortable years in which you're a senior person in the workforce. So you can do things like travel and your hobbies and take on new challenges. And I'm assuming that your health is okay and you're taking care of your health and making sure you have good medical insurance and you're living where you'd like to live. And if you wanted a second house, you have a second home. And so you might move to a less expensive area, but you have a lot of options. Then the third thing you should do with your money, if you're really thinking about it, is take care of your family, your children, your grandchildren. So it means estate planning is very important at this stage because each state has different laws, the federal government has different laws, and there are substantial choices that you can make which will enable you to make good decisions with respect to your estate. Now, the fourth thing that really has to be one of your priorities is you can give charities and you can give during your lifetime. And when you think about the charities that you can give to, one, religion, you can give to your synagogue, the church, other different philosophies of religious official things. And you can do good charitable causes. You can give to charitable causes you like. Usually people like to give to their educational institution where they graduated from. And then I'd say the fourth thing on this list, but an important list, would be the professional societies that had to do with your career and establishing your career and getting you recognition for your research. And it's always a pleasure to give while you're still alive, because then you can really direct your gift and you can make sure that it goes to the purpose you've established. And it's a pleasure. Like, so if you're giving out scholarship money, you can meet the scholars who get that money. If you're giving out money for a certain cause, you can then see that that cause develops. Now, the question is, why give to the APS? And I can just say that the APS has been substantial in my career. Very important, and many times when giving an invited talk, it enabled me to make colleagues around the world, and this established me in terms of my research. I did research both in science and in education, and actually did work for the APS at times. APS is a 501c3 tax-exempt institution, which means any gift to the APS is tax deductible. APS has been around. A lot of charities come and go, but APS has been around from 1899. I was involved in the celebration of the 100th anniversary in 1999, and I see the APS will be around for the foreseeable future, so your gift is guaranteed to really do what you promised or you got them to promise to do. 100% of the funds go to the mission and to advance and diffuse the knowledge of physics for the benefit of humanity. In other words, there's no overhead on the money. The money is used entirely for the purpose that you're giving it for. What's also good is the APS is very flexible in the sense that you can specify the program that you'd like to give, and they'll work with you to make sure the program that you would like to give the money to is within the realms of the APS and will also satisfy all the rules of the APS and of the tax laws. And then there's a great flexibility of giving. You can give, and you'll hear more about this in terms of David, you can give money, you can give stock, you can give real estate, you can give part of your pension by using IRAs and other things like that. And then you can establish things that are very helpful to your estate. And they're terms like trust, annuities, wills, appreciated stocks and assets, privates and family foundations. But David, who is the real expert, is going to talk a lot about qualified charitable distributions and something called the donor advised fund. So at this point, I'm really happy to summarize giving to the APS is a pleasure. I myself have given to a few causes and plan in my estate while I'm alive to give more money to the APS. I have situations where I'm working right now in Harlem where I pledged $1 million towards a charitable gift. I'm on the board of the Feminist Press, which publishes books, and I give to them. I'm on the board of a scholarship fund at City College and City University, which I give. And my wife and my wife has a 501c3 organization that has a theater company. So over the years, I've given a lot of money, and I plan to give more. So at this stage, I'd like to introduce David, who is the expert and will answer and ultimately give you a talk. And then both of us are willing to stay by and answer any questions you have. Thanks for listening. And here I present David.
Thanks, Brian. Don't go away right now because I do want to ask you a couple questions. I start my slides, my comments here with something you were just talking about the reasons people give to charity. I've put some of them on the screen: believing in the mission, giving back to the community, honoring someone, sharing those family values, feeling connected with a community or a cause. Oh yeah, and there might be a tax benefit. But Brian, I'm curious, why do you and your wife, what are some of the reasons, your personal reasons for being such philanthropists?
Well, it's just, I've been very lucky in life. I really lived modestly. As I said, I lived like one of those physicists. I always lived within my means. I was never ostentatious. And what happened is investing in like TIAA, which gave me some choices. My estate grew. And my kids are luckily healthy and are doing well, so I don't have to leave my whole estate to my children. And in fact, that just gives me some flexibility. And as things come up, recently a cousin of mine died, and it turns out he was involved in some historical societies, and there was no way I knew how to give him money, but I did trace down the historical societies and give a gift in his memory for that. Recently, someone from the Feminist Press, who was one of the leaders, died, and she was very instrumental, and so I decided to do it, give some money towards that charity. So it's just a pleasure to be able to respond to things, and I also try in the big gift that I'm giving in Harlem. There's really issues of like equity and making sure that everyone has has similar advantage in life. And I've been involved in developing so what I call pop-up exhibits in Harlem. We had one on the science of basketball. We had another exhibit on the science of hip hop and jazz. And I'm working with a physicist who's both a good cosmologist and a professional jazz musician. So there are things that you can be even creative with and make things happen that are really a pleasure to do, a pleasure to fund, and then a pleasure to see the results of. So I recommend it highly. So it's another phase of my life where I'm spending much more time being a philanthropist, and hopefully it will be a good one.
Well, I thank you for sharing that. And like we say here, philanthropy really is highly personal. We talk in my world, in the financial planning, the investment world, so much about taxes and the value you receive with a tax deduction that you can get from some of your charitable donations. But interestingly, this last one, receiving a tax benefit, these days is much less common. So you guys may be big fans of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, the TCJA, which boy, yeah, if you have insomnia, start reading the Tax Cut and Job Act. So this was a tax cut that was actually came in 2017, effective early 2018, and it changed a bunch of things about the tax laws that had to do with charitable giving. First, it more than doubled or nearly doubled the standard deduction that most of us can take on our tax return against our income. This year for 2020, for individual filers, that standard deduction is more than $12,000. Next year, the standard deduction for a married couple filing or joint filers is more than $25,000. And what that did is actually take hundreds of thousands, even millions of donors out of the ability to deduct their taxable contributions, their charitable contributions. I've got some research from on this recently from 2019 that 89% of charitable givers were not able to take a deduction because they were not itemizers on their tax return. So one of the things I want to do this afternoon is give you guys some ideas for how to actually take some tax advantage in addition to all those more intangible benefits that you receive when you give. So a couple other things that this Job Act, Tax Cut and Jobs Act did: increase the standard deduction, lowered income tax rates, which of course makes charitable contributions less tax effective with a lower tax rate, increase the amount we could leave to our heirs, that sort of thing. And even still, charitable giving has not declined in that time. So we're going to look at a few strategies. If charitable contributions have to be above that minimum of standard deduction, how do you get them that big without giving away the farm? Well, one way is to bunch those contributions. And by that, I mean put more contributions in some years and less in others. So where historically you may have been a $10,000 a year giver year after year after year after year. Well, under these rules, you can't deduct that $10,000 in contributions. But what if you bunched those contributions? You made all say 3 years worth, $30,000 in 1 year, and then you skipped a couple of years. And therefore, you would be able to itemize this year. These years, you take the standard deduction, say year 4, you have more accumulated contributions that you want to make, and you're able to itemize again. That's a bunching strategy, and I've seen lots of families use that to actually get some tax advantage from their giving. It's especially good if you have a high income year. If there's a capital gain that you take, for example, in a year, or if you have extra income. I have a number of clients who get paid their regular salary for a year, and then all of a sudden they're eligible for their pension on top of that in the same year, creating higher income tax liability. One thing that we see often is the use of a donor advised fund in dealing with this issue of bunching and being able to deduct contributions. So I'm going to talk a bit about a donor advised fund, but I want to try something this afternoon and launch a poll. So the poll is this, and I think it should be coming up here. Let's see, pick that one, and now I hit launch. So the question is, do you have a donor advised fund? We're going to talk in just a moment about what exactly one is, but let's take just about 30 seconds to answer the poll question. If you could click on there and say yes or no. See if it'll let me do it. No, you don't have a donor advised fund. Yes, you do. I'm interested in establishing. So click one of those and hit submit. So far, we're 50-50. I'll take another couple of seconds if you could just answer that. Do you have a donor advised fund question, or if you're interested. And then I'll close that out. And the response was 50-50. I'm not exactly sure where it went on the screen, but so here, what's a donor advised fund? A donor advised fund is a charitable giving vehicle that's established by a public charity, or often times investment companies or local community foundations establish donor advised funds. And it's a scheme where the donor gives a charitable gift to the donor advised fund. We call it the advised fund at the sponsoring charity. And so the donor advised fund is itself a 501c3 qualified charity. And then the donor makes recommendations to where those gifts go. So in practicality, if you make a contribution to a donor advised fund, let's say $50,000, but actually the average donor advised fund is much smaller than that, $50,000, and then you tell the charity, tell the donor advised fund, I want 10,000 to go to my church or synagogue. I want 10,000 to go to my alma mater. I want 10,000 to go to other nonprofits that you care about, maybe APS, how about that? Then what kind of benefits? First benefit is you get an immediate income tax deduction. That's because the contribution that you made would be higher than the standard deduction, is the word I'm looking for, would be higher than the standard deduction, and you could have a tax deduction there. Second, these gifts allow you to get typically a larger tax deduction than a gift to a family foundation because of the tax laws behind them. And then you do what I've mentioned, you advise the sponsor, the holder of the donor advised fund, to actually make grants to the charities of your choice. There's no capital gains tax. So one thing we often see is, rather than a gift of cash to a donor advised fund, often families will gift appreciated securities. We'll talk more about that in a moment. They're really easy to deal with. I set one up this year for my family, and really all of them now you set up online. You can transfer electronically, and it's quite an easy process. One great thing is, rather than have multiple receipts from multiple charities at year end or at tax time that you have to get to your accountant or put into TurboTax, there's one. because you make one charitable contribution to the donor advised fund, and boom, there's your receipt, there's your deduction. Some other positives here on donor advised funds, but this is a great way to deal with some of those changes in deductibility. Another thing that we've seen is, Brian mentioned, is gifting from your IRA. Now, this has been on and off for the last decade or even two, where you actually had the ability to make a gift to a charity from your IRA that was not taxable. Now, you probably know that when you take money out of your IRA, it's typically all in there, it's pre-tax. So guess what? You take money out either through a required distribution or other withdrawal, and you get to pay income tax on that. In a qualified charitable distribution, however, you instruct the custodian of your IRA, Fidelity, Schwab, wherever you hold it, to make a distribution straight to a charity, and there is no taxation of that gift. So, for example, if you're 70 and a half, so you need to be 70 and a half and be in the RMD age years. If you're 70 and a half, you could tell your investment person to make a contribution to APS, a qualified charitable distribution. You don't take it out first, it needs to go straight there. Now, one of the things that I've done for my clients who are interested in making gifts like this is actually give them a checkbook for their IRA. I think most investment firms allow this, but what that does, as long as you write the check from your IRA straight to APS or your other charity, it qualifies as a direct distribution from your IRA and qualifies for this. So you pay no tax on that, and you can actually gift up to $100,000 no matter what your required minimum distribution is in any year. So this is another great year to have a tax benefit by avoiding taxation on your RMDs. A couple of caveats: you can't make a donor advised fund gift, so this does not work in concert with a donor advised fund, but it's a great additional strategy. And I've had a few clients try to buy tickets to the charity gala or use this to fulfill a pledge agreement with a charity. Those, unfortunately, you can't do with a qualified charitable distribution. But beyond that, it's eligible to give to any qualified nonprofit. Next, and we've alluded to this briefly, is the strategy of gifting appreciated securities. So even with all the ups and downs in financial markets this year, stocks sit with within just a few percentage points of all-time record high prices. Last year was an amazing year for the market, and if you own things like Apple, Google, Tesla, some of the big high-flying Amazon, some of the big flying tech names this year, you probably have appreciated securities. Now, if you were going to make a charitable contribution this year, you could raise the cash to do that by selling some of those appreciated securities, or you could go into your checkbook. But surveys of American households show that typically less than 10% of household net worth is in cash. Much of it could be in appreciated securities. So the technique is to gift using those securities, stocks, bonds, mutual funds. You can even gift real estate or other more complicated assets and transfer those directly to the charity. Let the charity sell them or do what they will with them. You actually get a market value tax deduction, not based on your cost basis, not based on what you paid for, based on what it's worth today. Guess what? Entirely. How it works, some of the numbers quickly. Let's say you wanted to make a cash gift of $20,000. You could deduct that cash gift of $20,000. and save $7,400 based on a 37% income tax rate in income tax savings. But let's say you gave instead $20,000 in stock that you paid $5,000 for, and it's grown $15,000 in gains. If you sold that $20,000 stock and paid capital gains tax, well, you'd owe $3,000 on this $15,000 gain. But if you gift the stock directly, you make the gift, which you wanted to do. You get an income tax deduction for the same $7,400 on the cash, but then you also save $3,000 that you would have paid in capital gains tax. I tell my clients it's a very tax efficient way to benefit the nonprofits that you believe in and that you care about. And again, you can hold your cash for other purposes and use your long-term capital gain assets for that. Now, important that those assets, you need to have owned them more than a year. So if you bought in February when we had a market low and prices have doubled by now, or you bought Tesla and it's gone crazy, well, you need to own it at least a year for this technique to work based on the rules. So I'm curious. Let me try one more poll just for fun here. Let's see. Have you ever made a gift of appreciated assets? Let me launch that poll. It's really simple, yes or no. It's a great technique, and hopefully many people have actually tried that. I'll leave that open for a few more seconds. Gift of appreciated assets. I'll leave it open for 1 second. So far, everybody who's responded has done it. All right, we're 50-50. Let's see. Yeah, we were 50-50 on people who had done it versus people who hadn't. So it's a great technique. Ask your advisors this time of year about gifting of appreciated assets. Now, there's one other little add-on to that technique that we call the charitable swap or charitable rebalancing. So I actually did this with some Apple stock that I bought a few years ago. And I wanted to make a contribution of that Apple stock to my donor advised fund, actually. So what I did was I instructed my financial advisor, who's me, to make a transfer of that to my donor advised fund. We did that, but I still like that stock and I want to continue to own it. So what you do is you donate the stock, the bond, the mutual fund, and then you take the cash that you were going to use to make the charitable contribution and just rebuy the stock. And so what it does is you get a higher basis, higher cost basis, no capital gain version of that same stock or fund or bond that you liked. And you get a tax deduction and you don't pay capital gains tax. So it's a great way if you're thinking, well, yeah, I would like to use a gift of appreciated securities for your gifting, but you don't want to get rid of the company. Well, use cash to rebuy the company at that now higher cost basis. A couple of more things that just in summary here. So we've mostly been talking about what we call outright gifts. It's for immediate cash flow. You get an immediate tax deduction. You know, you're giving up control, but you've benefited the organization. If you use something like a donor advised fund, we would call that more of a structured gift program. Other structured gift programs are things like charitable trusts, private foundations, some of those things. Now, a third way to do very powerful gifting is through testamentary gifts. making a provision in your estate plans. A couple of great things about that is you get to use and keep the asset during your lifetime, take income from it, that sort of thing. And it can give you an estate tax deduction if that's applicable. Now, one of the things you may have noticed on those slides I showed you earlier about the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, they sunset in 2025. And what that means is that unless Congress acts between now and then, the almost $12 million, I guess it is $12 million this year, that you can leave someone under your estate or gift today drops back down to $5 million. So we will have many, many more taxable estates, and testamentary gifts can give you that potential estate tax deduction. Let me show you a couple of quick things as we work to wrap up here. First is a bequest of cash or some other assets. So in this, you would just say in your will or in your trust agreement, I want to give X% of my estate, or I want to leave this or that asset to a charity. And it's interesting how many people want to benefit an organization during their lifetime, but they don't think about, well, shoot, I could leave something to APS in the future as well. You know, how's APS going to replace my annual gift over all these years once I'm gone? So you do that through an estate gift like this. Now, often this does require that you go see your estate planning attorney and put a provision in your will, a codicil, or beneficiary designation, a specific bequest in your will or in your trust agreement. Another way to do that that's quite simple is a beneficiary designation gift. So you may realize that your retirement accounts, your 401k, your 403b, your IRAs, your 457 plans, life insurance policies, many other types of accounts actually have beneficiary designations. And those designations tell the account holder where do these assets go once you go. So it's a very simple thing. I get these requests all the time to add a charitable beneficiary to your estate plan. And some of the pros, really easy to use. You still have control of the assets during your lifetime. Very flexible. I have people change their beneficiary designations every year and add new charities, take out ones that they're not so wild about. You can use this to remove assets from your estate as well. So this is a terrific way, very simple way to leave a gift to an organization like APS that you want. Just talk to the plan provider, plan administrator, or investment provider, or your insurance agent. So that's what I had for prepared comments. Kevin, do we have any questions that we ought to look at? Things that Brian and I could answer for you. Kevin, you're muted.
Sorry about that, folks. So David, thank you so much for that presentation. And Brian, to you as well. You offered some wonderful ideas for people. Hopefully there were some things in these presentations that you hadn't thought about before. And hopefully this will inspire you to give some consideration to some of these creative ideas. And I think, Miriam, we do have a couple of questions if you want to go ahead and share those with David and Brian.
Sure, and for anyone else who has questions, feel free to just type them into the field that says questions. The first one asks if slides will be shared with attendees. And yes, for everyone who attended, we can email you a copy of both sets of slides. There's another question that asks, for David, of the many ways you've outlined to effectively give to charities, which one do you think is the most underused but offers the greatest benefit?
Gosh, great question. I would have to say the simplest is that beneficiary designation for lifetime gifts now. It's appreciated securities, because we have investment portfolios, and those portfolios have the potential of really benefiting the charities we care about. So that's on that one. I'd say on the testamentary, the estate side, it's just a beneficiary designation, because again, it's so darn simple to tell your IRA provider, hey, we have 4 kids. Instead of dividing my IRA 4 ways, I'm going to name a 5th kid charity. And so that charity, instead of them getting 25% each, the charity gets 20, and they all get 20 together. And it benefits, that has a legacy benefit like that.
Thank you, David. I hope you're ready for another question. This one's also for you. It says, David, because of COVID, are there any tax or compliance changes that should motivate us to give us more in 2020, which I think you did go over, but maybe in more depth?
Yeah, there are a few minor tax changes that were in the CARES Act, the COVID Relief Act. One of them is the ability of non-itemizers actually to deduct $300 in charitable contributions, even though you don't itemize. So it's a small amount, but I think a lot of taxpayers may take advantage. I guess the other thing I would say, Miriam, so this board that I'm on, the Colorado Plan Giving Roundtable, is an association of nonprofit fundraisers, executive directors, people like you and Kevin, who are very plugged into the nonprofit community. And there are a number of nonprofits that are really hurting this year. So what I would say is, first, make a determination of how much you can give, and then do it, because this year nonprofits need it more than ever. Some are having great record years, but others are really, really hurting. And so I would say in this era of COVID, your financial situation probably feels worse than it actually is. So just do it, make the donations. Did that answer your question?
Thank you, David. Yes. If anyone else has other questions, feel free to type them into the chat. If there's anything you want to add, Brian or Kevin, please feel free.
I can just say that I think the tax laws changed, that there's no necessity to take an MDR this year, a minimum distribution. So that's one thing. Second thing, that I think there's a limit to the amount of non-taxable funds you can give. In other words, if your income is $100,000, you can't give more than 60% to charity. This year, there's no limit on it. So if you made $100,000 and wanted to give $100,000 to charity from something, you can do both. So so that's part of the law, as I understand it. And I'm not the lawyer; I'm the physicist here.
Brian, great reminder. You're exactly right. Thank you. We may have a job opening for you on my staff. Those are 2 things I just remembered here. But yeah, RMDs this year from IRAs are not required. Right. So I have a number of clients who have said, well, shoot, I don't have to take it. I'm not going to, I'm not required, so I could roll it over and just keep it in there growing for next year. But I'm used to taking it. You've got adequate retirement assets. Well, let's give it away. Let's do some good with that. So
yeah, exactly.
Yes, and I really have to reinforce that, David. I think that many nonprofit organizations, and APS has not been immune from this, have had to pivot and adapt in lots of different ways, and our revenue has suffered because of that. So any support that that we can get to help us through this period is especially helpful. And One of the things that I would be remiss in not mentioning to the attendees on this call too is that if you aren't already aware of this, APS has what's referred to as a legacy circle, and this is a group of forward-thinking people who have made the very important decision and commitment to include the APS in their estate and will plans. And that can be a tremendous help. It can be a help to you as a donor if you're not in a position to make a significant gift now. It's something that can help this organization in the future. I would just encourage you to keep that in mind, because we certainly would welcome new members to this important group of people.
Yes, thank you,
Mary,
Kevin.
do you have any other questions?
That is all for now, and we are winding up on the time we had allotted for this session. So, if there's anything any of you want to add, please do. Kevin, that was a good reminder about Legacy Circle. You can find out more about that online. I think that's where David is pulling up.
Yeah, that's what I just pulled up, Miriam. And you guys have a terrific website here. And I always look down at the bottom. Donate to APS is a button you can find on the Engage. And you've done a terrific job in being informative for your donors here. So I would encourage anybody who's contemplating this to contact Kevin or Miriam, and or go to this page and learn lots about it. So it's been fun being with you guys.
Right?
Thank you, and thank you both, David and Brian. Terrific job today, very informative, and we're so appreciative to have your knowledge and experience to share with the attendees today. And thank you, Miriam, for coordinating and facilitating the Q&A session. And all the best to all of you. We're grateful for you as you celebrate Thanksgiving in probably very different ways, but stay safe and healthy, but have a wonderful holiday. Take care.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.